Hey guys, I don't know if you are aware or if you know about the Bay Lakes of North Carolina. The Bay Lakes of North Carolina are really neat, are unusual, and not like really a whole lot of other kind of lakes that there exist in the world. And if you don't know the term Bay Lakes, you certainly know some of them if you've lived around here for, well, I don't know, a few years. I grew up knowing about the Bay Lakes, didn't call them the Bay Lakes, we said they were lakes. The Bay Lakes of North Carolina all have in common, and one of the things that kind of separates them from the rest, they all have in common nearly perfectly rounded edges, which separates them again, like I say, from other lakes, which have inlets. Bay Lakes don't have inlets, they're round. We have Bay Lakes again throughout eastern North Carolina, South Carolina. There are thousands of them, honestly, in eastern North Carolina. And you may think that, hey, thousands of lakes that I don't even know about in eastern North Carolina? Absolutely. And they're all of varying sizes. Most of them have dried up or turned into swamps over time, which is why you probably don't know about most of them. And all of them in North Carolina, all of them follow a northwest to southeast orientation. In other words, if you know how I-40 curves from Raleigh down to Wilmington, they follow that rough kind of pattern. You'll also find Bay Lakes in Delaware, Georgia. Some people say there are some in Iowa and Michigan, but they're not Bay Lakes. And in Delaware and Georgia, they call them different things. Like I've heard them called the like Delmar Lakes or whatever. But the ones in eastern North Carolina are really different from all the rest of them. Kind of cool that we have that here. Now, some of the ones that are Bay Lakes in North Carolina, in eastern North Carolina, some of them are pretty well known. And when I say them, you might know about them. Jones Lake, for example, Bay Tree Lake, which I've spent a couple of times there, Singletary Lake. If you don't know those, you'll certainly know Lake Waccamaw. Huge, huge Bay Lake, probably the biggest one. There's also White Lake, which Bay Lake, but yeah, we can work it. But White Lake, I mean, spent so much time there when I was a kid. Now, all of these Bay Lakes also have peat deposit, peat as their bed, full of organic, decayed material. Now, peat does not feed many plants well, but some love and they thrive in it. Of those are bay trees like Red Bay, Loblolly Bay, Sweet Bay, which that's why the lakes are called Bay Lakes, named so not because of the trees, or not because of the bays they don't have, but because of the kind of trees that exist around them. So hence the lakes are Bay Lakes because of the trees that line those lakes, not because again they have bays, which are indentations of larger bodies of water like Hudson Bay or the Bay of Fundy. I don't even know where I came up with that one. But these are all individual habitats, unconnected to others, and they're mostly fed by their own water sources and are typically shallow, normally at most 20 feet deep. And some are even more shallow than that. And all their waters are mostly acidic. They don't typically have inlets bringing water in and or bringing water out. A lot of them just rely on rainfall. Most of them are 500 feet across, but again, we're talking thousands of these. Some of them you've seen, some of them you have not. They're so distinctive and so different that, of course, and as is human nature, that people have theorized how and why they have existed for years. I mean, the people have talked about these things for years. A quick Google search will get you theories about these bay lakes, how they existed, how they were created. Like just a quick Google search: sinkholes, spawning fish that became trapped, retreating glaciers, meteorites, asteroids, and you get odder ones too. I've seen explanations like tar pits from a quick Google search. Why do they exist? They're tar pits. Yeah, they're not. Um, Dinosaur nesting areas. They would have been some massive dinosaurs. And of course, because some people are just like that, ancient aliens, because you've got to have those people. And almost all of those, yet, no, those are not real. Anyway, almost all of these lakes, as I said earlier, rely on rainwater runoff to replace evaporated water that comes from living in North Carolina. Since they are shallow, droughts hit them especially hard, which is how so many of them have dried up. Some have turned into bogs, swamps, some have been turned into farmland once they have dried all the way up. You can see this through Google Maps. You can see just by zooming in. Zooming into eastern North Carolina, especially southeastern North Carolina, you will come across circular or semicircular farms here and there, and chances are high that they are remnants of the Bay Lakes that used to exist, with their own ecosystems and their own life forms, because as they were cut off, they tend to develop their own biospheres. They're all in various states of evaporation, and eventually they probably all will evaporate, but they're all gone yet. The theory that has the most likelihood of being correct about why they exist, with science to back it up, is to, of course, go way back in time to when eastern North Carolina was underwater. And as the water receded to the oceans, tide pools began to be formed because that's how things work. Just think about whenever you're at the beach and the water goes back, and then you will have tide pools. Well, this is the one that is most backed up by science. And those tide pools, when they are especially large, those tide pools will begin to develop their own circular currents. Again, you can watch that when you go to the beach. And those circular currents will erode the soil beneath the water, giving these tide pools increased depth. Now, they could have been formed by glaciers as well. Could have been formed as a combination of the retreating water and glaciers. But with no flowing water in or out, once the oceans retreated, the waters would have become brackish, killing much of the life that lived there. They decomposed, helping make this brackish water more acidic due to the peat deposits caused by these organisms' decomposition. And all that certainly makes more sense than ancient aliens. But the deaths of these life forms, plant, animal, microbial, fungal, didn't mean it would be dead forever. As Dr. Ian Malcolm said in Jurassic Park, life finds a way. Along with bay trees, cypress trees also do well in this swampy, brackish environment, much the same way that pines do in sandhills. Cypress trees spread out into what they call knees. Cypress knees trap vegetation in swamps. Since they jut up through the water, create little islands which trap more vegetation that's circulating, thereby increasing the size of these swamp islands until they join land and eventually covering up all the water. And it is in this way that the Bay Lakes disappeared, most of them, at least most of them. Others were drained for agricultural purposes. Now, Suggs Mill Pond in Bladen County, not Johnston, is a bay lake, and according to evidence, used to be a whole lot larger, to the effect that 91% of the lake is now gone. This is what's happening to our bay lakes. It's now known as Horseshoe Lake. It shows this process in action. Other plants that have found a way to survive in these inhospitable soil of the Bay Lakes are carnivorous pitcher plants. You also get bladderwort, which is carnivorous, butterwort, carnivorous, sundew's carnivorous, and they all exist in various Bay Lakes and really not anywhere else. I mean, you got to get your food from somewhere, and typically plants don't have to rely on eating meat. These do because of the harsh nutritional, well, I guess, lacks that you have in the soil. And those islands of habitats cut off or different, at least, from the surrounding areas means that these places are likely to have life that is unlike those surrounding areas and home to some endangered species. So, what does this all have to do with Johnston County? Well, it's twofold. If you grew up in this area, meaning southeastern North Carolina, between 1 to 3 hours or so from the beaches, before the interstates connected all of us to all of them, oddly specific, but this is a podcast on Johnston County after all, you probably spent some vacation time in White Lake or Jones Lake. Both of them are Bay Lakes. White Lake has been a vacation fixture in this area since 1901 at least. Beach life without the ocean, and this lake is a bit different from nearly every other bay lake. The water that evaporates from this one is replenished by an underground freshwater spring, making the water a clear, current free, mostly, vacation destination, especially for those that live in this area that felt that the ocean was just not worth the trip. I mean, from where I live, I can get to the beach in about an hour and a half, too. But that's the interstate. Without the interstate, you know, if you've tried it, it's not exactly that easy. White Lake is a lot faster. And enough people have frequented the area over the last century that businesses and a culture and a town had even grown up all around it. Jones Lake, during the era of segregation, was the destination of those people that were excluded from White Lake, seen because of Jim Crow. Sort of puts a whole new spin on the word white, doesn't it? But it was designated as North Carolina's first state park for African Americans in 1934. That meant, yes, state parks were off limits in North Carolina to anyone except for white people. Until then, and just one after then. Ridiculous. Now, Jones Lake is a big enough deal that it is frequently the site for family reunions that have gone on here for generations. Lake Waccamaw, closer to the beach in Columbus County, has also been a destination for people from this area. It is our largest bay lake at 9,000 acres. It is big enough to have its own origin story. The Waccamaw Siouans believe that it was formed by a falling star. Now, Waccamaw gets nearly all of its water by rainfall or swamp water, and therefore the water should be brackish like the other bay lakes, except for White Lake, which has its own underground spring. The water should be acidic, like the others, but there is a limestone bluff on the northern shore that balances out the water's acidity, so it can support an abundance of wildlife. Now, the cool thing about Waccamaw is we know that it was underneath the ocean because it has at one point had at least one whale to inhabit that lake, like a full scale, full blown like whale millions of years ago, which gives some credence to the to the under ocean tide pool theory. But now there's another Johnston County connection to, well, to these Bay Lakes that the others don't have, but that's for another episode altogether. Now, other connection is that Johnston is home to two extinct Bay Lakes of its own, part of the same system. Actually, three of those, but there's sort of an asterisk there. To look at a Carolina Bay is to see a remnant of geologic Earth history, which moves a lot slower than human history. Like I said, there are thousands of them from Delaware to at least Georgia, all of various sizes, and not all of the ones that exist have been identified as bays just because there is a landform that is perfectly elliptical and oriented in a northwest southeast direction does not necessarily make it a Carolina Bay. But like most of them, the ones in Johnston can only be identified by the geological variations that distinguish them. In other words, for most of their water portions have disappeared, replaced by land, either through natural filling in, like the cypress knees, or by people filling them in, usually for agricultural, commercial, or residential purposes. In those cases, you might not even know that they are there unless you check out the GIS photos or geological surveys or LiDAR scans. Like, for example, in Johnston County, we have some bay lakes mentioned earlier. One of them is Stevenson's Bay. Now, you may have driven past that and over it who knows how many times, especially if you travel to Smithfield much. Because if you drive down Dirtwood Stevenson Boulevard in Smithfield, it's an extension of Booker Dairy Road, which at the time of this episode is home to Smithfield Selma High School, the Schrack, News Charter Schools. If you drive down Booker Dairy Road westward, you'll cross over Buffalo Road and you'll drive over one of the newer bridges in the area. It's long and above a swampy area, and that swampy area is what's left of one of Johnston's bays, Stevenson Bay. How about that? We've been driving over a lake for years. It's been filled in a couple of times in a couple of areas for agriculture, has had drainage ditches, canals dug into it, and it was extremely modified, or extensively modified at least, for the bridge that spans it. But once upon a time, it was a naturally formed bay lake and part of the Carolina Bay system. Another one, Wilson's Bays, is on the northwest edge of the community of Wilson's Mills, just off the US 70. For reference, is about 4 or so miles southeast of the current campuses, at least of the day of this episode, of Grifols and Novo Nordisk. It is a bit unlike others, as it's made up of two Carolina bays that overlap each other. There is still a little of the water left, and like Stevenson's Bay, some wetland, and you really wouldn't know that the remnants of a geological marvel is there, but at a glance at it on Google Earth alone will show you the rounded curves that are the telltale signs of a Carolina Bay in the land. It's also a bit unusual in the fact that you find gravelly settlements that are telltale signs of glacial activity, meaning that Wilson's Bays were once not only bay lakes, but they were also the homes of glaciers from the Ice Ages or Pleistocene eras, if you want to give it the actual scientific designation. And given that significant organic matter rests underneath all that filled in land, it was home to an abundance of wildlife from Earth's past, likely unique to the area, like most of the remaining Carolina bays. 99.9% of all the species of life and life forms that have existed on Earth have become extinct. Get that number in your head through our planet's history. We that are alive and everything that's alive right now are only 0.1% of the living things that have existed, including mushrooms, trees, bacteria, all belong to the 0.1%. At the bottom of Wilson's Bays are the remnants of beings that belong to the 99.9% that are not. It is said that if you stretch out your arms and use them as a physical timeline of all life on Earth, human history, all of it, even the kind that wasn't recorded yet, would rest on the fingertip of a fingernail. The Carolina Bays are a glimpse, a little farther back, and right in our literal backyards. Hello and welcome to Joko Yo. And thanks for listening. Until next time, y'all be good.